that. And it's like, no.
It wasn't like I was trying. In fact, I don't know exactly why. Maybe you can tell me why.
Oh, I could definitely tell you. You said a lot of wild.
Maybe. Maybe
You said a lot of wild. And then
I love that Joe Rogan put on a button down. Like, he was like, all right, guys, I'm going to meet with the president. Throw this button down with my jeans and sneakers on.
CNN, in all their brilliance, by highlighting your wild, made you much more popular.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump did the damn thing. He went on Rogan's podcast for a friendly 3-hour conversation with Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience. And look, Trump was his usual self. And I think in the grand scheme of things, this 3-hour conversation worked to Trump's advantage.
So in this episode, wildly, I can't believe it happened that Cenk Uygur finally agreed with Donald Trump about something. We are going to get into that, right? But what's fascinating is the way how Democrats, if you'll notice, they are starting to kind of soften up a little bit to the thought of a Trump presidency. They don't sound the same from even 5 months ago.
I feel that it normalized him, humanized him, made him seem like a normal guy that will resonate with at least a huge portion of Rogan's audience. I also found it to be kind of dull, to be honest with you. It was a little boring, a little rambling. There was a fun part where they were talking about hot pilots. That, I perked up a little bit for that part of the conversation.
No, you got it.
She's a little disrespectful, right? It's not just about hot pilots. The story was about, because actually I like that story. I've heard him tell it before, and I think it's a beautiful story. Trump went over to, I think it was Iraq, or was it Afghan? One of those. I'm sorry. And he went to meet with the generals because he wanted to find out how come ISIS is still a problem. How long is it going to take to get rid of ISIS? But before he could land, they were like, we're about to land. We have to turn off all the lights. But he was talking about the military man. He was like, the good looking guys, they could be in Hollywood movies or whatever. Trump is older. So, like my grandfather used to kind of talk like that back in the day. Like, oh, that's a dapper gentleman. Look at him. He wears his clothes good and stuff like that. So he was saying things like that. Anyway, how the generals were able to land the plane. The pilots, our servicemen, were able to land the plane in the complete dark, and they had to because they would have been shot at by ISIS. And so then he goes on to talk about how they came up with the plan, the generals, the real ones, he said, on the ground to get rid of ISIS in 4 weeks. But then, of course, that came back again. And if you know the real story about ISIS, then there's that, right? But anyway, so let's not, be too flippant about everything, okay?
I see this guy. He's out of Central Cast. He's so attractive. The pilot was so attractive. Even better than Tom Cruise.
I was like, hot pilots? Where? Like, what are they talking about?
And then a cop comes in. It turns out he's not even a cop. Starts stripping. It was amazing. Okay, he didn't say that last part. All right.
He always has. By the way, guys, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Okay. All right.
So the part we just showed you, that was this best part. You're welcome. Because that was the only part where Joe Rogan held him accountable. Okay, because he has said some wild crap. And he said it to his face. That's good. I like that. And Trump, actually, that was one of his better moments. Because when he goes, yeah, maybe. See, that's good. That's self-effacing.
Yeah.
That people can relate to that more instead of being defensive about it and whining, crying, etc. So that was...
not whining and crying, though. Like, see, now y'all going to make me go back to... it gets tired after a while. People constantly having something to say about you. And they did it more to Trump than anybody else. I finally had to concede that. I remember when he was president and he would say that. And I'd be like, oh, my God, they gave Obama a hard time. But then when I went back and looked, it's like, no, the media never gave Obama a hard time. Remember, the only scandal Obama had was a tan suit. Right. Okay. Right. But with Trump, it was like, he fed the fishes and he just dumped the thing there. And then, he put ketchup on his steak. Oh, my God, everybody, let's get a headline. I mean, my goodness, I would be defensive, too. I would be defensive. I know me. I would lean into it.
It was actually the very best part of the interview. The rest of it, I agree with Anna. It actually made Trump look really good. But the huge problem was it was bereft, what a fun word, of all facts. All facts at all. Like, so if you watch that interview, you got to completely...
So he agrees that it made him look good. And yeah, he does agree. But there's a policy position that he does agree with him on. But to sit there and say that all he did was lie, no, that's not all he did was lie. But I am mad that they didn't touch on Iran and Israel. They should have touched on that.
misleading view of who Donald Trump is.
I wouldn't say it was bereft of all facts. There were certainly a lot of untruths, okay? There were a lot of misleading statements by Trump, but he also said a few things that sounded insane to me. And I was like, that's not true. I gotta look this up. So he made a point, for instance, about how a huge amount of California's rainwater just gets flushed into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And the reason why we do that is to conserve a very specific tiny little fish. I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not the reason. Like, I knew that the majority of our rainwater was being flushed into the Pacific Ocean. I didn't realize that was the reason. That's literally the reason. I looked it up. So he says things that sound crazy that actually have truth behind them. But then he says things that sound like, oh, that sounds like that might make sense. And then you fact check that, and it's like, no, that was complete and utter BS.
Yeah.
Let me help Anna out. He doesn't finish his sentences. That is a problem with a Gemini. I do it too. But in the grand scheme of things, he was on a 3-hour interview, so he was able to finish a lot of his sentences. And he was talking about that rainwater thing, and he explained it completely. This is what I mean about the so-called left and why a person could be on the so-called left. But I don't know how with all of this information out here today that they can stay on the so-called left. They never have enough information. That's why they're there. But the problem is you're a journalist. How did you not know about that rainwater thing in California when you're a journalist? When you see all these Green New Deals and everything that I'm sure you were parroting and you were fighting for, you didn't look into it. You didn't look at the fine print. So on my other channel, like now I talk about a lot of more culture war type of relationship type stuff with trans and Dr. Phil and guests and psych mental health, right? But before that, if people go way back in my catalog, you'll see that I was starting to break down the Inflation Reduction Act because I didn't want to talk about it without knowing. I pulled it up and I started looking at certain spots. I never read the whole thing, but I read enough of it to know. So that if I report on something, then I can tell you why it's good or why it's not good or hell, how you could use it. There was programs in there too. People could use as a loophole, whatever. But how are you? And I am not Ana Kasparian, right? I'm not on TYT. I'm just a girl turning on my computer and talking to you guys and believing that you deserve informed consent, right? So, but if this is your daily job and you didn't know about the rainwater thing, and then I'm sure you were down for whatever Green New Deal, whatever type of environmental regulation that's out there, what's going on? And so that's why these people just, I don't know. I don't know. And then when you say, oh, but then there's other stuff, small stuff, he says he's lying. No, you're being subjective. I just found out what fake electors were because I was like, why do they keep saying fake electors? It wasn't fake electors. It was people who realized that the election should not be certified in their states because they figured out something went wrong. So they wrote letters to say, this is exactly what went wrong. And we should not certify the election. That's it. That's it. This is what they've been screaming fake electors about for 3-4 years.
Yeah, there was a couple parts, like, of course, he's not going to lie about 100% of the things. And you're right, sometimes, like the raking of the forest we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But that's partly because he doesn't know how to speak, right?
So when he talks about something that I actually think is a good point, like the Native Americans did controlled burns. They did forest management due to wildfires. We don't do that. And there's a price to pay for not doing that. But rather than talk about controlled burns or fire management, he instead talks about raking the forests. So like if you understand what he's really talking about and what he means, you'll give him a pass. But a lot of people don't know what he's talking about.
And that's on them and they need to look it up. Like, I mean, after a while, it's like we cannot just sit here and always want everybody to say everything exactly perfectly right, especially when in a high intensity situation. Now, of course, obviously the Joe Rogan interview was not that, right? But again, you see, and now I'm making a bunch of defense for him. And then look, she still doesn't even know. She's talking about, the Native Americans control the forest with wildfires. Yeah, probably really small ones. What we do is not that. We burn land on purpose just to take land. It's the craziest thing. We kill animals, and there's like a quota for a certain amount of wildlife that needs to be killed. Okay, and I know this because I looked into the policies and stuff. All right, man. After 2020, I was like, man, I got to turn every rock. I was like, no, y'all do nothing but lie around here. So I just feel like, look, at the end of the day, that's good that they're agreeing with him on certain things. Everybody's softening up, though. You could tell that the rhetoric is more like, well, you know, comme si, comme ça. But at the same time, it's because they know I don't want to get too braggadocious. I mean, I really have no dog in a fight anymore. But it's not looking good for Kamala. I think we can all agree on that. I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye.